Welcome to LIeven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast, a podcast hosted by Marcelo Aebi from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland, and Lieven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium. We aim to draw a map of the state of criminology across Europe through the words of contemporary criminologists. How is criminology defined and taught? Which are the main lines of research? Which are the main schools of thought in each country? These and many other questions are answered here by fellow researchers who share their vision on the development of criminology in their countries from its beginnings to the second decade of the 21st century. If you want to know and compare their stories, stay tuned.
Today we are interviewing Ineke Haen-Marshall. Professor Ineke Haen-Marshall is professor at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology and the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice, Northeastern University in the USA. She obtained an MA in Sociology from Tilburg University in the Netherlands in 1973, an MA in Sociology from the College of William and Mary, Williamsburg, USA, 1974, and a PhD in Sociology, Bowling Green State University in 1977. Previously, she has been visiting professor in several countries, amongst others in Belgium at the Catholic University of Leuven. Her research interests are comparative and global criminology, youth crime, race, ethnicity, immigration and crime, self-report survey research, and criminal careers. She is especially known for her long-time investment in the international self-reported delinquency study. This interview was conducted on the 21st of June 2024.
Welcome, Ineke Haen-Marshall. It's really a pleasure to have you in our podcast today.
I'm very happy to be here, Marcelo and LIeven, and I'm really looking forward to having a discussion with you.
Thank you very much for being here and for willing to do this interview. Let me just start by the first question, and that will be a very difficult, special one for you because you have experiences in many countries. The first question we normally ask our interviewees is how to define criminology as it exists in your country. But you have worked in several countries, so maybe you can answer in a comparative way. We just let you choose.
Okay. Well, thank you, LIeven. That's a really good question, very broad question. As you know, I got my education, my early education in the Netherlands. And then I moved to the United States to get my master's, my PhD. And the rest of my paid working career as a criminologist really has been in the United States. So I'm clearly very familiar with criminology in the United States since I experienced it really from the level of being a master's student, a PhD student, going to some universities, really starting at a pretty low prestige kind of state university, Youngstown State University, where basically we focused on unemployed steel workers as our students. Then I moved to basically to the University of Nebraska at Omaha, which is a well-respected state university in the middle of nowhere, as they would say in the United States. And then for the last 15 years, I've actually been in Boston at Northeastern University, which is considered to be in a way, a more prestigious, more competitive university. So so in a way, when I talk about criminology and criminal justice in the United States, in particular, I really can comment about it from the perspective of, in a way, of an insider, somebody really who had to work pretty hard, the American way, to actually, move from a kind of a relatively low place to a respected position. On the other hand, when I look at the Netherlands, at one hand, of course, I grew up there and I went there for my study in sociology at Tilburg University. But then I moved to the United States. So what happened is that while I was in the United States, of course, I kept many contacts with the Netherlands and with Netherlands Dutch criminologists. But what is kind of interesting is that in a way, I always have looked at Dutch criminology kind of as more or less as an outsider on the one hand, but on the other hand, somewhat as an insider, because of course I know the Netherlands, but also because a number of those criminologists became kind of personal friends. So in a way, I've had lots of like personal interactions with people, and of course, I also have been involved in some criminology projects in the Netherlands, and then to include maybe Belgium as the other comparative country where I actually have direct experience. As you may know, LIeven, I was in Leuven University for maybe half a year to replace temporarily Lode Walgraven. So I'm also kind of familiar with like the Belgian system. And then my other experiences are kind of like yours, when you kind of just know about the other countries. So to start, in a way, I've always had a kind of a comparative perspective ever since I went to the United States, because you cannot help it, right? You come from kind of a small country like the Netherlands, you come in a big, impressive country like the United States, and you cannot help but say, hey, this is very, very different. Particularly with regard to the drug policies in the United States, coming from the Netherlands, like in the mid-1970s, when the drug policy was very relaxed, coming to the United States, where it was quite repressive. So that was a huge kind of difference. And also from the perspective of basically the level of crime and violence. When I came to the United States in the 1970s, crime, it became a big issue. The violence was increasing. So it was like, a big political issue. Well, in the Netherlands, it was really not a big deal at all. Okay. So anyway, so I've always kind of taken a comparative perspective from the beginning. And so maybe 25 years ago already, I actually kind of wrote a little article where I kind of tried to write down, really, what are the differences? And I kind of talked about like what I call the criminological enterprise in the United States. And that term I thought was really a good term, because when you talk about criminology in the United States, you really talk about an enterprise. It's a huge enterprise. And so when I have to describe criminology in the United States, I still would use the description that I actually used. I think the article was published in 2001, where I would say that, criminal justice and criminology in the United States is basically policy-driven, methodologically sophisticated, and lacks theoretical luster, to use that term. So those are kind of like the three terms. It's very much policy-driven. I think you find there's very much a preference and a focus on quantitative analysis, with very often very sophisticated kind of analysis. But I think when you look at the kind of whether you can characterize, American criminology with a particular theoretical framework, I would find that, clearly there are some, basic American theories that were developed, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago that still have an impact. But when you really look currently at what's happening in the United States in the field of criminology, I don't find a lot of concern or focus on theory. You would call it an enterprise, because as you both know, there are a large number of programs and degrees, lots of PhD programs. There are lots of peer-reviewed articles. There are many, many textbooks. There are many, many conferences. There are lots of research institutes. I mean, it's like it's a big enterprise. So when I can then go to the Netherlands, I think what is interesting to me is I think that when I look at criminology in the Netherlands right now, it has become very much Americanized. And I was looking back in a little bit of preparation for this talk. I was looking back a little bit at some of the stuff that I have kind of written about. And one of the things that I have written about maybe in like the late 1990s, early 2000s, is this idea of like the Americanization of the Netherlands in general, or, the crime problem in the Netherlands, or the criminal justice approach in the Netherlands. And, already, quite a long time ago, I kind of made the argument that at the one hand, we don't really need to worry that the Netherlands will embody all the kind of the negative parts of the American criminal justice system. Because what I believe still is, the very strong, democratic values. It's just a very different kind of country. But on the other hand, even, in the past, I already kind of really noticed that it seems that the parts of Dutch criminology, and maybe the more dominant part, was working very hard to be more American than the Americans almost. And when I was in a couple of those visitations, in different kind of programs, criminology programs in the Netherlands. And indeed, what you really found is there was really a focus on, of course, becoming more internationally accepted, which also means very much a focus on the English language and English kind of research, which very often is American-based research. So what I find to be the case currently is that it's really clear that I think what I know of criminology in the Netherlands in terms of publications and research institutes, that it has followed very much indeed the kind of the American model of being really, methodologically sophisticated. Traditionally, it has always been very policy driven. And in terms of kind of, a concern with or the belief in a kind of a normative criminology, I find that that's not a dominant belief. So kind of when you talk about like a comparison right now, I would think that the criminology in the Netherlands to a large degree is almost modeling themselves on the American thing. To make a quick jump to Belgium, of course, I do not know about all the different things that's happening in Belgium, but I have to tell you one thing, that I was really struck by the difference in the approach. When I first came to Belgium, maybe, I don't know when it was, like 2005, I don't know exactly, time kind of blurs together. But I remember I really became a criminologist in the American model. So when I would even teach, research methods, you would always emphasize you have to be totally objective, value-free. I mean, that was like the main thing. And you have to be quantitative because, that's where things are happening. But when I came to Leuven, I really had a really steep learning curve because I realized that I think, at least in Leuven, there was much more like a normative approach to studying crime. I focused on kind of what Lode was doing, which is like the juvenile delinquency. And I used his book. I forgot what it was called right now. But it was really clear that even, that he was able to frame empirical research but within a larger kind of a normative framework of, the importance of inclusivity and what have you. And also what was happening in Leuven, of course, we have people there like Stefan Parmentier, with lots of focus on transitional justice and other things. So anyway, the thing that really struck me as being really different in Belgium as compared to the Netherlands is that it seemed to really embrace talking about justice and values and inclusivity.
Very interesting view, because I also have the impression that the Netherlands is much more looking at the US and also copying the US theories, while especially in Belgium, you mentioned Leuven, there is this strong empirical tradition which is related to symbolic interactionism and even critical criminology in Ghent with Patrick Hebrecht, who died a couple of years ago. So that's, I think, one of the main differences between the countries. Yeah, very, very interesting how two neighboring countries can have so large differences with regard to theoretical and methodological topics.
Yeah, if I may kind of go back to that issue then, because in the Netherlands, I think typically right now that I think that's kind of the dominant model. We have the NSCR, the Netherlands Institute for the Study of Crime and Law Enforcement, which I was just looking at its website. They have like so many people. It's clearly a huge institute. And, that institute, of course, does really good work, but it really fits into this model of not so much interest in theory, but really very careful empirical analysis. When you look back a little bit, though, in the history of the Dutch criminology, that clearly has not always been the case. And I have to say that, some of the people, again, that I knew personally, or knew personally really, like in the 80s and 90s, where, and some of us are still active, were in a way more, more normative, more concerned about, about justice and what have you. So, for example, I just want to mention, we have like Hans Boutelier. Maybe you know Hans Boutelier.
Yeah.
You're right, who was in Rotterdam. He's now a professor of interesting name, Resilience and Freedom or something. Anyway, but clearly, Hans Boutelier, who was at one point, together with Josien Jongerthals, the editor of the European Journal of Crime and Crime Policy, Hans Boutelier.
Criminal Policy and Research.
Yes.
Journal of Criminal Policy and Research. Yeah,
right.
Sorry.
And that's the one that Josien Jongerthals, together with Hans Boutelier, for a long time, they were like the editors together. Well, he's kind of an example of somebody who would probably not fit into mainstream criminology, but he was clearly associated with a criminological enterprise in the Netherlands. And he has, he clearly takes a kind of a different kind of a somewhat more reflexive, critical approach, trying to put crime in a larger context. Likewise, I'm thinking also about René van Zwaningen, who is at Rotterdam, right? And of course, at Erasmus. And, he clearly is also part really of kind of the well-recognized criminologist, but his approach is also, he's focused more on the global south. He is more critical. He kind of takes a broader kind of perspective. Then when I'm kind of thinking back a little bit of the people who by now are retired, for example, well, although I'm not sure, Willem de Haan.
Willem de Haan. Groningen,
he might be, and he was in Groningen for the longest time. I don't know whether he's emeritus or not yet exactly, but his work also in the 90s, he wrote, he was like a critical criminologist. He wrote a book, Politics of Redress. And I'm looking here I made a note of that so I would remember the name. which really focused again on social justice. And he also, I think, has been involved maybe in the relatively new journal Cultural Criminology in the Netherlands. So he would really, I think, kind of not fit into this kind of maybe oversimplified idea of quote-unquote Americanized approach. Then, of course, another person that is a good friend, although I haven't talked to him for a while, is Frank Bovenkerk. And Frank Bovenkerk, of course, was associated with the Willem Pompe Institute in Utrecht. And of course, the Willem Pompe Institute, from its origin, always has had a more holistic, humanistic approach to trying to understand crime, focusing also very much on prisons and what have you. And Frank Bovenkerk, only later on in his career, actually switched to being a criminologist. Because before that, he really was not so much interested in crime. And I think his approach, starting like in the mid-1990s or so, I think he really started to focus more crime, mostly on like minorities, ethnic minorities, and crime and organized crime. And he is actually basically a qualitative, a cultural anthropologist. And he always, I think, he has made really interesting contributions. And he always, I think, was quite maybe critical of maybe the methodologically driven so-called objective criminology. And he became also part of that Dutch Van Tra committee that in the mid-1990s was part of a kind of a committee that was appointed by the government to investigate police practices dealing with organized crime. And Henk van der Bunt was part of it. It was Cyril Feyenoord was the chair, I think. Henk van der Bunt was on it. And then also Frank Bovenkerk. Anyway, but that's a little sidetrack here. But so I think the work, say, that Frank Bovenkerk did would not really, fit in that. And then, well, maybe now I go back a little bit too much, but I'm just thinking it's really interesting how the whole criminological enterprise changes over time, right? Because right now, I think we can make a comparison, but when you go back, there are really different historical trajectories. And I think, well, in the United States, the historical trajectory, not that much has changed, in my experience. When I look at the Dutch criminology, I think there has been much more movement and change because, I think when you look back even a little bit farther, you find that kind of the normative element in the study of crime was quite important in the Netherlands, also in the 1970s, 1980s still. So, for example, I'm thinking about a name that you probably don't remember. Maybe you do, LIeven, Herman Franke. And Herman Franke, he died in 2010. When he was about 62 or so. But he was really interesting because he actually was for a while the editor of the Tijdschrift voor Criminologie, the Dutch main journal for criminology. And basically for a long time, he did like empirical historical research on particularly prisons in the Netherlands. And he actually wrote a huge book that was translated in English in 1996, and it's called The Emancipation of Prisoners. And it's really interesting. He actually got a prize from the Division of International Criminology of the ASC, the American Society of Criminology, for that book. I have to say I nominated him, but I was happy he got the prize. But anyway, what's interesting about this is that he then later on decided that he worked with like Ronnie de Sauer. Again, I would not think Marcelo would not name, LIeven might not know the name, but Ronnie de Sauer.
Yes, she was the supervisor of Gerber Brandsma.
Yes, she was right. And she was in Nijmegen. And basically that institute kind of was closed. And what is interesting, and this is just again another side track here, but what is interesting to me is also that when you look at some of the earlier Dutch criminologists, that a number of them actually were writers and essayists. And that's really interesting to me, because what you find is that this Ronnie de Sauer, who was like the head of, the Nijmegen Institute, wrote a number of novels kind of under a pen name. And actually she recently was discussed as being like, one of the more important female writers in the Netherlands. Herman Frank, who I just mentioned, decided that he really wanted to be a writer, and he actually ended up writing a number of books. One of them actually got the Bank Prize, an important Dutch prize. So he actually became a writer. He also wrote lots of like columns and what have you. Then we also find that Nagel, who goes back a much longer time, who was one of the earlier criminologists, also had like a second career as a novelist, kind of a critical essayist. So I guess one of the points I'm trying to make here is when you look at the history of Dutch criminology, and keeping in mind, of course, we talk about a very small country as compared to the US, but so, everybody knows each other, and it's much easier to maybe try to figure things out. And maybe individuals have a greater impact in a country like that. But when you look back in the history of the Netherlands, you really find that a number of, of criminologists were actually very much socially engaged, and also very much maybe broader scholars or intellectuals or writers, which I think, is just not the case anymore.
Few of our listeners know this about the history of Dutch criminology, and many scholars also being writers. I know this, of course, from my own perspective, as we are neighboring countries, but it is a unique situation, and I think it enriches criminology in a way. Do you know why this tradition disappeared? Maybe people don't have time anymore, time pressure, I don't know. But all of a sudden, fewer professors of criminology were interested in also writing novels.
I think it just reflects maybe the times,
Okay.
maybe the backgrounds of the kind of people. Because actually, I think Herman Franke actually somewhere, I should try to find it and I'll send it to you, LIeven, it might be in Dutch. I think he tried to make some arguments of, in a way, why, and in a way, why, what kind of people are interested in studying crime. And I think he kind of linked it a little bit also, like that also people who, are just interesting in kind of good and evil in society may also be like good writers, because I don't know, and they also are interested in studying crime. But so and then you kind of look back at some of the unique history of some of the people. As you know, there's always this argument that, generally speaking, of course, the Netherlands was very much influenced by what happened during the Second World War. And I'm sure that's true in Belgium, but I'm not so familiar with the argument there. But that also explains why, for example, after the Second World War, particularly in the Willem Pompe Institute in Utrecht, there was this really strong sense, of maybe limiting the power of, the state and make sure, to make sure to respect the rights of individuals and emphasize the humane aspects of offenders. So I think that effect, that the negative memories of the Second World War have very much, I think, shaped maybe the more critical approach. The writer aspect, I really don't know. To me, I just think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think you're right about the effect of Second World War, and I think the effect was much larger in the Netherlands than in Belgium. Maybe I'm wrong, but other criminologists also told me that everybody was influenced by this should never happen again. Of course, Belgians as well, but more in an engaged way. Let's say it this way. That it affected also their theoretical thinking, and I think Belgian critical criminology had different influences, like Jack Young and so on. That was mainly Patrick Hebrecht, because Belgian criminology was mainly symbolic and directionist. But I think the impact of the Second World War was, maybe because of the Anne Frank Institute, that I don't know, maybe it had an influence on the way scholars were thinking, and maybe it influenced their work. It's a very interesting discussion, and I think, it probably influenced much more people in the Netherlands than in Belgium. I hope I'm not wrong, but I think so.
Yeah.
I have two comments, one very specific, because there is another Dutch criminologist. I think there are two, but I'm not sure if she's also Dutch, who emigrated to the United States and have his career there. Is Rolf Löber and Margaret Stouthammer. I don't know, because her name also sounds Dutch, but I don't know if she was also from the Netherlands.
Yes, I do know Ralph Luber and Marga Luber Stouthammer.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know they very much, they do like lots of life course.
Exactly.
Criminology. I think I met one of maybe Ralph once, and we spoke 2 words of Dutch, I think. But other than that, I really don't know much about them.
I was surprised because they worked a lot with David Farrington.
Of course.
And I know, I have been in all the conferences of the European Society of Criminology, but I became executive secretary after the conference in 2004 in Amsterdam.
Okay.
And I know that in the first years, Rolf and Margaret were there, and they even supported the fellowships. But then suddenly, I don't know, something happened, they disappeared. And also I got the impression in the Netherlands that they were considered as American criminologists. Okay. Now, I don't know. I don't know if they retired. I don't know which is the situation. But they didn't have a lot of contact, I think, back with the Netherlands. They made their career there. While you have keep this contact,
Yeah, I think that's really because I would consider. Of course, I would recognize their names as Dutch, and so I want, But I think basically their work and their publications, they are very much, I think in a way American. Also, I don't think they were really interested in doing anything comparative or international. Yeah. They really fit in a particular, in the paradigm, a very quantitative, trying to understand, the different factors kind of thing.
Yeah. And the other one, more general, now that, we interview different persons from the same country and neighboring countries, and then you can start. I'm building a narrative, of course. It's probably wrong, but when I put together everything that you said, I compare with Jan van Dijk and Catherine Weilever, then I have the impression that in the Netherlands, where you mentioned the importance of the war, which is quite important, which was not mentioned really before, and then you got seen from the outside, a sort of neo-Marxist criminology. Many people talk about critical criminology. I don't like a lot the word critical because we're all critics. But it was more neo-Marxist. This is one line. And then at the same time, of course, you mentioned that when you went to the States, violence was much more present there. But it seems from what I've discussed that in the 70s, there was some violence and some places that both Catherine and Jan said. Jan came with the idea that some places that now are very touristic were relatively dangerous places. Of course, Jan says we were very successful in the criminal policy we applied, and that is why it went down. Catherine does not share the explanation of why it went down, but I have the impression that at one moment crime was there. So the Netherlands introduced a national victimization survey very early in the 70s. It's before the British Crime Survey. And then like reality struck back, and you have like these two lines. You have the Marxist critical, let's say, and the ones that were much more into criminal policy. And this became much more important when Herben Bruinsma took the NSCR. I cannot criticize a lot the NSCR because I'm the head of the External Advisory Board.
Oh, okay.
This became very, I'm joking, I would criticize it, but I mean, this became very criminal policy oriented, very empirical. And then the other tradition, especially because of the scandal, I think, LIeven, correct my pronunciation, with Wouter
Buikhuizen. Yeah.
And so I've been putting this together, but I'm not sure if I'm just creating like these two lines, two opposite lines. In Germany, they told us that there was this confrontation between the two lines. And at one moment, the empirical part, because they produce a lot at the NSCR and historically also the WODC, the Ministry of Justice published a lot. It's like this line, the more empirical line, sort of won the battle. Because also René van Zwaningen, he was coming also at the first conference of the ESC, and he comes still, but you see them less. I don't know, maybe it's just an impression.
Well, basically, I think what happened is, what you can call the more critical voices. There were some critical voices there, but some of them was like the abolitionists. So they were really extremely like, let's get rid of, the whole criminal justice system, Holzman, Bianchi. So I think they were very outspoken, but their proposals indeed were quite, far out. And then indeed there was the reality. I don't want to paint the Netherlands in the 1970s as like this totally crime-free country, but there was some crime. I kind of disagree with Jan's assessment that in the 1970s, well, maybe there were some areas where maybe you would not really want to go, but I think you have, maybe I look at it more from the American perspective, which And here I could really say that there are certain areas in many, where I really would not want to go. Compare that, so I think it's all a little bit a matter of perspective of how bad it really was. But I really think what happened is the reality that, okay, there were some few outspoken, maybe critical people who had pretty almost very far out ideas that would not get lots of support. And then I think really what happened is that, the WODC, the Research Institute in 1973, I think, was established. So which means, that now there is some money. And I think really basically what happened, in a way, I do believe a little bit in a national character, a little bit, or priorities. And the Dutch basically are pragmatic, and they don't really like ideology, and they want to play it safe. I would say so a little bit. And things might be changing right now, but that's a different story with what's happening there now politically. So I do think that basically from a very pragmatic perspective, the idea was, okay, we have some issues, crime was going up also. the government puts some money in it. We do some research. We want to be policy focused. And then, in I think the early 90s, we get the NSCR, and basically they got all the money, and they got the jobs, and they got the security. And at the same time, the institutes at the university had lost some of the credibility because of some of these controversies. So I think in a way it was a very fertile ground for you should not call it governmental criminology, but this idea that maybe criminology should be really policy focused, it should be empirically based. So I think it also reflects a kind of the Dutch, it's kind of a pragmatic thing also, like let's not get too excited, let's try to solve this problem. Anyway,
but it's a very nice analysis that you made, the pragmatic side. That's why I'm so surprised of that the first case of cancel culture and the wizard hunting that they made with voter. Help me with the pronunciation of the exactly. I mean, how could this happen? And that he was chased like that. And
I could understand, though. I mean, the cancel culture of Wouter Buikhuizen is interesting because, in a way, when you really look at his career a little bit, I mean, he was also at one of the first people at the Research and Documentation Center, so which is like, boom, that's the government. I mean, that's how boring can you get? He also, I think, he was also the promoter of Josien Jongerthas's PhD, I think. I
didn't remember that. I didn't know that.
Yes. So I think in a way he was very much, I think, just part of maybe the I don't know, I should say the Old Boys Network. I don't know exactly. But I think maybe what happened there also, and I kind of can understand it, is, again, looking back to the war and when you look at maybe the history again of, the recent history in the Netherlands with the bad experiences, obviously, that are related to somewhat, Nazi biology, and then maybe have a few outspoken opponents, including one person, Piet Grijs, who was like a very well-known columnist, who was very critical. So I kind of can understand that could happen, actually.
But that they destroyed his life. He retired from criminology. Yeah. He went to live in Spain.
Yes. It deals in antiquities. Yes.
Yeah. Then he got one lesson. He was invited back. There was a sort of they apologized with him, but it was already done. I mean, his career was destroyed, and this heavily affected. The thing is, he's too old now because we wanted to make an interview with him.
Oh, that would be nice. Yeah.
And he's 90, and so we're trying to maybe do it. Yeah.
But Marcelo, times have changed because now we consider this like this is crazy. But when I even look back, to kind of what happened in the United States, because this is kind of related also. Well, in the United States, obviously, there's always been emphasis on race. That's like a big thing. So already from a long time ago, when I would come back to the Netherlands and talk to some colleagues or family even, they would say, God, what is it all about? All this focus on race and it's not important and all this other stuff. But but of course, things have changed now. But in the United States, race always has been a huge issue in the study of crime. And therefore also anything that in the past, particularly where you kind of start looking at some biology, some biological factors, that was a trigger. And even in the United States, where there are not that many critical criminologists, there still was a kind of a trigger thing going on. And I do remember, and this must have been like in the late 1990s, there was a conference that was, I think, sponsored by NIJ or NSF or something, that would try to look at the link between some biological factors and race and crime, something. And basically, so in a way you would say, well, why not? That there was a big outrage about that, and that conference actually could not happen. Okay, and that was maybe because of a simplified, maybe misunderstanding of how you really can study, like basically physiological or biological or genetic factors. So I think maybe something like that was also the case maybe with Wouter Buikhuizen, in that it triggers. It's like it triggers things, and things get oversimplified. And now when you look, which I think is another interesting thing, difference when I look in the Netherlands and the United States, basically, the role of race or ethnicity or even migrant status, for the longest time, again, really being professionalized in the United States. For me, studying race, that's what you do. I actually developed at the University of Nebraska in Omaha a course that was required that basically was called Race and Crime. And they still have this kind of course, but at the time, that was like in the 1980s, that was a kind of a thing that we needed to do because the huge importance of race. Whenever I would have discussions with some of my Dutch friends or colleagues, this idea that you even would study race as such, or the importance of discrimination, or, was considered to be like, that's just crazy. And now look at how times have changed, right? When you look at, the importance of the study or the issue of, we can call it ethnicity. We don't necessarily call it race, of course, in Europe, for, again, obvious
Exactly.
reasons.
The wording is important there.
You're right. So again, to go back to the kind of the scandal, the canceling of Wouter Buikhuizen, I think I kind of can understand that when you look at it in the context of the time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's important. Yeah. What you were saying about ethnicity, yeah, it's a major issue nowadays in Sweden, for example. But the idea of using the word race, I don't think it would be accepted by the university standards, probably. I don't know. I cannot imagine writing a European journal using the concept of race. You would use ethnicity or something like that. But of course,
I would even say that the American Association of Physiological Anthropology has on its webpage a whole explanation of why the concept of race as a biological construct is not valid. You can use it to study the biogeographical ancestry, but you can't do anything more with it because it's not a dichotomy. It's quantitative. I mean, there are many characteristics, and it's really not a valid concept. So, but of course, the sociologists who studied race were not aware of the developments in physiological anthropology, I think, and that's why they still used the old concept of race. I mean, I may be wrong.
No, I think that's an excellent point, LIeven, and it's really difficult because there are a couple of things going on. So to kind of go back, so the idea of race is a social construct, right? And you kind of and it's very hard to make people aware that race is a social construct. On the other hand, living in the United States, race is everywhere. I mean, it is, and as a researcher, you are using, and they all use race and ethnicity, two different ones, and race is classified as either, of course, Caucasian, white, Native American, then they have Asian, and then they have African American or Black Americans, and then they have some other categories.
You said something very interesting. Maybe you can repeat it. That it is everywhere when you live there.
So what I wanted to say about race is that obviously, as scientists, race is a social construct. It's not real. We know that. On the other hand, particularly living in the United States, race is really a reality. And you can put race in quotation marks if you wish, but it is a reality in the minds of people. Just to start at a very simple thing, even, as a researcher, to take a step back to research, the US Bureau of the Census asks about race and it classifies people in, 5 very artificial groups. And like you mentioned before, maybe Marcelo, is when they also have the category of ethnicity, which is defined as Hispanic, non-Hispanic, or Latino, non-Latino. And so there is some movement to try to kind of change that a little bit, give people some more options. But the reality is that therefore lots of the articles and reports that people use automatically use these classifications because that's what is being used. So that's one thing. On a broader level, there is no question that American society is a race-based society. It's huge. We know that maybe in Europe, like social class might be a bigger divider, but in the United States, I would say race is such a primary factor that there is such a long history, of course, of racism, bias, that even today, when everybody is very much aware, maybe that of the discrimination, the bias, the inequality, the reality is that racism still it's everywhere, and it's very, very often it's very implicit, of course, but it's very much part of the culture, of the jokes, of everything. That I think maybe for a Dutch person or for a Belgian person, it might be hard. Or for a Swiss person, whatever, it might be hard to really imagine how profound the effect of race is in American society.
Yeah, I agree. Race was that there is much more genetic variation within each group, and we all come from Africa, so all European and non-European groups are just a subsample of the original human diversity. So therefore, it is a meaningless construct, and there has been interbreeding everywhere. So modern genetics really show that it doesn't make any sense, but people don't seem to believe this.
Exactly. I totally agree with you, LIeven. All I'm saying is it is a reality. Maybe everywhere in the world, but particularly I think in the United States, race is such a primary factor. And racism, basically, we have the kind of built-in kind of structural racism. And that's not just like people would use the word quote unquote woke, which I really feel is an offensive term. But, but there clearly is an awareness of, basically the racism. And it's not a matter of woke. I mean, the reality is, I can hardly find even the words to express how important race is, which I probably know because I truly, live and see it day after day after day. And then you just even drive through a city like Boston, which is supposed to be kind of all advanced city, it's still a hugely racist city. The bad schools are the schools in the black neighborhoods. I mean, I should be more eloquent about it, but it's, I think, hard to underestimate how racially divided a society this is.
Yeah. And I was surprised when I was at Rutgers in Newark, New Jersey. That the campus is in a part of the city which is half African American and half Portuguese, Brazilian. But the campus indeed it's on this side, which it used to be Irish 100 years ago, but it appears in the soprano. But I'm going by the branches. So I sent my daughter, who was at that time, the first year she was 2 years old, and maybe 3 the second year we were there. And so I sent her to the daycare center that was in the campus. And she was, they were all African Americans plus one Asian girl and Melanie, my daughter. And so I was really happy that she was there mixing. But I received comments even from a local policeman who was probably what they call Latino, who said, but here people do not go to these places. Maybe you should think about putting her in another place. So I was surprised, because this idea of a mix of cultures, I think that it was better achieved in other places, like for example Argentina. Because for me it's a nightmare if you ask me who I am. I must answer like Diogenes, a cosmopolitan, because ethnically I'm Caucasian, and my families come from Switzerland, Italy, and Spain. But of course, I spent the first 20 years of my life in Argentina, so I'm supposed to be a Latino, but that would be culturally. But then I've been living for more than 30 years in Europe mainly. So what am I? And probably you have similar problems with your identity. Who are you now? You are people want to put you in specific places, a Dutch or an American, but maybe you're someone else. How do you feel towards this?
The reality is indeed that that's just a way that people categorize people, maybe as a quick way of trying to understand. Speaking personally, I have a double nationality, Dutch and American, but I apparently still have a strong accent, which I don't think I have. But what is interesting to me, that's one of the first things. A couple of years ago, I went actually to a grocery store in Omaha, and here, of course, in most grocery stores, they actually pack your stuff for you. It's not like you have to do it yourself, right? But anyway, and the young guy said to me, "Welcome to America," because and my daughter was with me, and she just had to laugh, because here is the reality. Come on, I've lived here a long time. But anyway, so there is still this reality. I find that even, that one of the first things people pick up often is, at least in the United States, is kind of your accent. When we are together in Europe, we don't notice the accent because we all have accents, right? So I think the whole idea though of identity, we're talking about identity politics currently. I mean, look at what's happening again in the United States politically, where it's so clear that, particularly in the Trump section, and I am sure in this podcast it's okay to say that, Trump,
whatever you want.
Trump is despicable and he is very, very bad for America. And he really plays on kind of maybe the anger and the frustration of groups of people in the United States that feel they really are kind of suffering for perhaps the huge inequality. And what do? They kind of blame basically the immigrants. They blame the black people. They don't like women. Anyway, where was I going with this? Oh, the identity politics. So I think that's very dangerous, because more and more I think that's what we're doing. And I think it's also happening somewhat in Europe.
Yeah, I have the impression that the more you talk about it in these terms, the more you make it worse. Because you keep insisting, no, this is because he's a foreigner, or because she's a woman, and then you insist on the topic that should have been accepted normally, you put it again back. And And so I saw an analysis by Le Monde, which they are sometimes very good, like The Economist. Sometimes they checked, where were the regions where most people were for the for Nacional. Now they has another name. That, let's say the right wing or extreme right wing party. This is the extreme right wing party, of course, and they didn't find the real correlation, between city and urban. Yeah, there is some correlation, but the most they found is that the people that think that they are underestimated by the cosmopolitans, by the people in the city, the elites. They feel underestimated, and Trump used a lot that, and that rhetoric. But it's the same here. They feel, because if we treat people that vote in some way like you're stupid, how can you do that? I mean, this is not the best way to restore relations. Maybe we need to find another way. It's like, I don't know, but okay, yeah. Well, we're going to another topic now. To go a little back to the discussion, maybe another thing that you can tell us about your experience in teaching criminology, because you also taught in Belgium, you said, and I don't know if in the Netherlands at one moment did you see difference? Because, for example, what I see in Switzerland, we don't have a numerus clausus, so we have a lot of people, and this gives classes a different way of working. While in the American universities, I got the impression that once the student is in the system, especially at the master level, he or she will finish the studies. That was the impression that I got, that the selection is made before, at least in the big universities. While in our universities, you can really get selected at the master level easily. We had this trouble with students coming from Canada who were surprised that they were not getting the minimum and blaming the professors. I don't know if this is something that sounds for you.
Well, that's an interesting question. It makes a huge difference again in the United States where you are, what university, right? Because we have basically like community colleges, but we also have, we have state universities that sometimes are very good, sometimes are not. So there's like really a huge difference in how selective they are. So that's a big thing. Then, of course, so my experiences, so let me start with my most recent experience, and that is I'm teaching at a private university that's quite selective. It's a very expensive university. I think for like an undergraduate degree, the costs are about like $60,000 a year.
Oh,
it's right. And a master's, so that would be like for a 4-year degree, and then like for the master's degree, it's somewhat comparable. So I mean, it's very expensive, and it's quite selective. So my experience is indeed that the students you get are good students because they know how to write and read and that kind of stuff. But there is also this kind of expectation, since it's very much a commercial thing, they paid the tuition, so they really should get at least an A. Let's not even talk about failing a course. So that's kind of what you find, I think, at least at my university. I'm just trying to think, I know what you're saying, that at one point you should be able to just flunk a student because they don't know what they're doing. I think that still happens, but I have to say, in my experience, it's harder to do that, but again, it depends very much where you are. I'm sure if you're at Harvard, it's a different story. My private university also has lots of international students and lots of students from India and China. And in a way, and that is another challenge because they very often pay full tuition. So they pay a lot of money, but often they really are focusing on like the hard sciences, STEM sciences, and not on the social sciences. So in the university system, students do have to take a certain number of like social science and humanities classes. So what happens is when I teach a big intro to sociology course, that maybe like 1/3 of the students really is international, not from Western countries, but from, like India, China. And that means that it's very difficult to actually teach that course and keep up your standards because so many concepts and ideas. It's really kind of, American based. So we have challenges there for sure.
Yeah, that is another interesting point that you raised, because I was in this meeting it's a network of Latin American and European universities. We had this. I was invited to a meeting in Brazil, and of course, the golden model when we were developing criminology in Europe, mainly when I was in Spain. The few years I was, 5 years I was in Spain full time. Then I was only part-time, but I know quite well how it was defined. We were trying to get inspired by countries where criminology was well developed. One is the United States. But in the American universities, you have less specific courses about criminology than in the European ones, because you have all these, you mentioned, these general courses that you must take.
Right.
And this is a huge difference, because it's another extreme in Europe, where not in Switzerland, because we take classes from sociology and psychology, but in Spain they have all specific classes, and you don't have enough professors, and it's very difficult to produce. They have 4 years of undergraduate to produce. So many courses. It's 240 ECTS credits, a lot of work, and this is quite different. I got the impression that, contrary to the idea that in America they don't have a general big culture, they should have it, those who that go to university, because you have a more general development, no?
That's true for the undergraduate degree, because there you have to take a certain number of, humanities, social sciences, some hard sciences, but then you have to also, declare a major. Right, and then the major could be criminology, but that is really, then you get the bachelor. But there, of course, we still make more of a distinction between the bachelors and the masters, unlike Europe, where I think the masters is more a logical, you follow up immediately. So in a master's degree in criminology, criminal justice, that is pretty much all focused on, criminology and criminal justice. And I think that's a kind of maybe, different in the US, just basically this criminal justice, the term criminal justice, I think, as a degree, right? Because we know what criminology is. That's basically more like looking at the causes of crime and prevention, what have you. And but then the criminal justice element, really, and I think that initially in the United States was really the stronger element. Because the criminal justice element is really the element that focuses really on the administration of justice, police, courts, corrections, those kind of things. And initially, when you look back in the United States in the 1960s or so, the federal government gave a huge, an amount of federal funds to basically develop, university level courses at the level of criminal justice as one attempt to try to improve police, community relationships and what have you. So this idea of criminal justice is very strong and very well developed. And for the longest time, as that was considered, quote unquote, a more applied section, and that the criminology was in a way the more theoretical, more general kind of approach. And generally speaking, I think it used to be that you would consider like criminology a little bit like higher level, maybe because it was not supposed to be so applied. Anyway, that's
no, but I know. I was thinking that, for example, if you say to a psychology student or sociology student, undergraduate, that they're going. I mean, many of them, not all of them. I don't want to generalize. Go there because they don't want maths. They don't want hard sciences. If you when you tell them you have to do some statistics, they are already complaining. I cannot imagine if you give them maths, and I've seen that in some universities you have maths at the undergraduate level, and it's a huge difference. And sometimes when you discuss with people, it's difficult to know that we're talking about the same things, because these differences are quite important. And if you have not been there, you don't know the difference. And so we think we're talking about the same thing, and it's not the case.
You're right, right. That's for sure. Yes.
Another thing that we like to ask our guests is a question how crime changed during their lifetime. For example, you mentioned that when you went to the US, violence was very much present, and there was a change in that. But how do you, and you live it?
Yeah.
How do you see that?
Well, when you look at United States, we're all kind of familiar, I'm sure. Well, maybe, you are. I mean, virtually all Western criminologists are, with this idea in the United States, kind of the crime drop. So when I came there in the 70s, but then by the 80s, by the 1980s, we really had like a really high level of particularly lethal violent crime, gun-related crime, when, something like 10 per 100,000 was kind of the homicide rate. So that was actually, the time when I was getting my PhD and I started out. So violence and crime, particularly, gun-related crime in comparison to Europe, was really high for a developed country. So therefore, lots of the research that was funded by the federal government, of course, focused on violent crime, gun-related crime. It also focused at the time much on the study of criminal career and career offenders, career criminals, because it kind of all fit with this kind of focus on, we have a huge crime problem. And there was this belief indeed that, that there truly are career criminals. And in terms of developing a very efficient incarceration policy, we want to be able to select and identify those high-level, violent offenders so we can incarcerate them, which was, of course, a very American approach. So that time was very much, there was very much a focus on crime. There was a lot of, particularly violent crime. Not so much, I think, the typical kind of burglaries and car thefts were somewhat comparable, I think, to Europe. And then, of course, then we eventually kind of got a little bit of the crime drop. But at the same time, of course, there was this realization that in the United States, so many people were incarcerated. So we really get, mass incarceration kind of as a policy that some people would link to the, the increase in crime, but other people, other analysts who look at who actually got incarcerated, we find often they were just drug-related offenders and not necessarily violent offenders. So I think basically the crime picture in the United States with regard to street crime, violent crime, there was a lot in the 80s, then it kind of went down, and it has been increasing a little bit, the violent crime over the last couple of years. Okay, that's one thing. I think when you look at other areas of crime, there has now been a kind of an increasing focus, like maybe on white collar crime, corruption. Look at Trump's trials. But so I think clearly white collar crime, corporate crime, political crime has been existing in the United States, but it never got that much of a focus until perhaps a little bit more recently. I think there has been a lot of focus, kind of on kind of gang-related crime, more so in the past than now. So I would think when you look at what really has happened to the real crime problem, in a way, I think the United States actually is in better shape now than it was 30 years ago or 40 years ago, with regard to personal violent crime. Of course, in the United States, crime always has become a huge political issue. And what we find, again, currently, for both the Democrats, but more so even for the Republicans, there is this kind of emphasis on, there's this huge, violent crime wave, which is not true. And we really should do something about that. So I think really with regard to kind of maybe ordinary street crime in the United States, I think it's not so, really things have not really gotten worse, even gotten better. I think when you look at the Netherlands, what I can see is that, of course, there was some violence in some of the big cities in the 1960s, 1970s, but not a whole lot. But what I see, well, I think what you do see in the Netherlands, though, that there has been a development to some more like targeted violent crimes. When you look at some of those, assassinations, really, of like, some well-known people like Theo van Gogh, for example, Peter R. de Vries, some of the, plus some assassinations that really have been connected to some, high-profile organized crime trials. Well, that's kind of very quote unquote un-Dutch. And I think that also shows that the other part of crime in the Netherlands that I think is more serious now than it was when I lived there. And this is kind of this idea indeed of, I think the Dutch word they use is ondermijnende criminaliteit. Undermining criminality, that's undermining, which means that more and more there is this entanglements of legal and illegal influences, very often related, of course, to this really a huge drug related criminal efforts. Particularly, actually, the area where I grew up, like in Tilburg and Brabant. I mean, there's really, when you look at there, they find kind of laboratories. I mean, there is so I think in that regard, I think crime in the Netherlands has become, to me, in my view, a little more worrisome, maybe than it was maybe in the past. I cannot really say anything about Belgium, LIeven.
As you
No,
know,
but it's very, very good.
it's very difficult to get data in Belgium, but regular crimes are just going down, and internet crimes and fraud are going up, and also the undermining crime, corruption. People pay more attention to it, but
they pay more attention to it. Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it's really going up. So, but in Belgium, it's really difficult to say something because of a lack of data.
Yeah.
Now, the issue of drugs is these laboratories in the Netherlands is quite impressive, because they are doing a lot of work to control them. But the moment you get one, you have another one being developed. And the other thing about this evolution throughout time is, I know this is not your field, but the difference is so important. Like the prison population. You go to the US in the 70s, and that time, Bloomstein was saying in 73, prison populations are going down. What will happen in the future? Maybe he was surely not saying we're going to close the prisons, like Sutherland was saying in 37, I think, regarding the UK. Then this huge increase. And at the same time, the Netherlands, completely the opposite. At least in the last 15 years, the Netherlands have had a policy of reducing their prison population. They were borrowing prisons, or not borrowing. They were lending them to the
loading
Belgium,
them.
Yeah, exactly.
Renting them out.
Renting them, exactly.
Yeah.
They were renting them to Belgium prison, and Norway also.
Norway,
But this is like a completely, I don't know if we can say something about that. It's so different. Even the composition of the prison population in Europe is quite different than that of the United States. Is this something that you want to say? It doesn't matter if not, because it's a very specific topic.
Right. Well, I would just think when you look, though, at the population in Europe in prisons, I do think there's a kind of an overrepresentation, really, of like non-native born or like immigrants. So I think that is by itself really interesting too, because then when you look, of course, at the United States, typically the prison population has been disproportionately, people of color, and what it kind of shows to me is maybe very general kind of observation is that, people who are not native born or immigrants are much more likely to fall under the scrutiny of the justice system and end up in prison. About the decline in incarceration in the Netherlands, I I could not explain it, except I would probably go again from a pragmatic idea, is that they probably figure it's too expensive. I don't know.
The reputation of the Netherlands.
So
paying attention to money. Okay. And of course, one thing that we must mention, because you played a major role there, is the international self-reported delinquency study. Because few people know that you were responsible for having the United States in the first waves, because you were doing that. At that time, you were in Omaha. And then you became the successor of Josine Jungertas. So maybe, what is this experience of doing research on both sides of the Atlantic, adapting a questionnaire? How does it work? Is it the same in the two places?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you bring up my favorite topic, because, the International Self-Reported Delinquency Study, I think, is a really kind of a good example of an international project. I also think that if I look at the history of it, it kind of shows you also how things have changed over time, and how criminology and criminologist networks have changed over time. So when we know that in 1988, I think it was like Josine Jungertas, who at the time was the director of the Research and Documentation Center of the Ministry of Justice in the Netherlands. So Josine was a really influential and important person in the Netherlands. For one thing, she was actually one, I think, of the first women who actually had kind of a profile there. And she also was, very influential. She was, of course, the director of that institute, which meant she kind of could influence kind of what was going on. But what's interesting about Josine is that she also was very internationally oriented. So I actually met Josine in the United States at the American Society of Criminology. We were together in a panel. I had not met her before in the Netherlands, which was actually also true for all my other Dutch criminologist colleagues. I had not met any of them in the Netherlands. But I all met them actually later on, mostly through the American Society of Criminology.
Do you have any idea of the year, more or less, when you met her, Josine?
Yes, probably I would think maybe early 1980s. I could check it out.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah,
No. It's just because of the time is important there, because then you were there before the project started.
I was there before. I was already so I did not, and I didn't know any Dutch criminologists at the time. So I met Josine at the American Society of Criminology. And what was interesting, again, because of her position, but she, happened to know a number of American leading criminologists, among others, Travis Hershey, Michael Gottfredson, and I'm sure other people too. And of course, in Europe, she knew Martin Killias. So, but in the United States, she knew and was quite friendly with Travis Hershey, which also then has influenced also her focus in the International Self-Report project, and also in the policies in the Research and Documentation Center that were evaluated and included, is basically social control theory. So it's really interesting to see in a way how maybe that American influence was just kind of linked to, almost to a coincidence. So at that time, Josine, of course, already was familiar in the Netherlands with self-report studies. And she then was able in, I think it was 1988, to get together some American criminologists, including Malcolm Klein, which you may remember, right? Also Martin Killias, a number of European criminologists, to kind of talk about this idea, like, hey, we know there are problems with measuring delinquency. The official statistics don't work. Why don't we try to develop this standardized instrument? Okay, that kind of was the beginning. And then in very shortly thereafter, she she kind of organized some more meetings to actually get together with people to figure out how can we make a standardized questionnaire. I was then invited again because by now I knew Josine, but the rest were all Europeans. So then really it was quite a lengthy process when I think about it, and the debates about what should be included in a standardized questionnaire is very interesting. Like the Americans, American viewers, you would include something about drugs. Well, at the time Josine would say, who cares about drugs? So this project initially kind of got going with just like 12 countries, and it shows you against the how things just work coincidentally, because it really was a European project. But I happened to live in the United States. I knew Josine, so I got an NSF grant together with a colleague to actually collect data for the United States in Omaha, Nebraska. So which of course, as you all know, is not representative of the United States. So that's kind of how this project kind of got going. And it also shows you how things went much slower then, because we collected the data, I think, in the early 1990s. And actually, it was not until 2003, I think, that we actually published a second book where we had all the things, the data. And it also shows you how now we're so used that everything goes quickly. We share everything. Even merging the data was like a major, I think in the summers I would come to the Netherlands and Josine would make some coffee and lunch, and, we would talk about this stuff. It was kind of a relaxed project. Okay. But anyway, then we kind of decided, then we moved on. And then between 2006 and 2008, we did the second wave, and that was really, there we got like 35 countries involved. We now also included victimization as an aspect. In the first one, we only had offending, and then it all went kind of a little bit quicker. But again, the ideas, it's really different from the victimization survey, because a victimization survey at one level is not really theoretically interested. It has obviously some questions, but I think the explicit purpose of the ISRD project really is primarily theory testing across countries, and actually trying to come up with comparable estimates of delinquency is a purpose, but it's also virtually impossible. Okay. So anyway, and what was interesting also, the way we did this, since Josine was the chair, she had very much a belief in a bottom-up approach, so to speak. So we spent actually some really nice workshops. One of them in Switzerland at Martin Kilias's uncle's hotel or something like that.
Brilliant.
You're right.
Brilliant.
And here this was really important, because we even had some Russian colleagues, and we just had, colleagues that would come from all over the place. And we had a couple of days where we would actually discuss this, but we also was an opportunity just to get to know people and to find out that Finnish and Russian people after dinner like to drink a lot and sing songs, for example, right? Anyway, things like that. So we did, and then that was, a big project, but, I think it was quite successful. Then we moved on to preparation for ISRD 3, and unfortunately, Josine got sick and actually passed away in 2010. And after that, then I took over as chair, and the project has moved on nicely. But if I may say something about Josine Jongertas in this regard, obviously she was a very dear friend, so that makes it very important. But she also had an amazing, in my view, I think she had an amazing impact actually on Dutch criminology. At one level, she internationalized it a lot. Again, she became also very, friendly, I think, with Michael Tondry, with Martin Kilias. I mean, kind of all these kind of names that you kind of know, because, she was a kind of a key social figure, but also somebody who took her discipline very seriously. And she was also very passionate because although she was very interested in theory testing, she also would make a big argument that everything has to be policy relevant, which is of course related to, her position as the director of that institute. And she was really a kind of a true believer in the policy implications of social control theory, emphasized the importance of the family and, early childhood socialization. So she was very important in basically, kind of moving the international project ahead. She also was the editor, as I mentioned earlier, of that European Journal of Research in Crime Policy and Crime.
European Journal on Criminal Policy and Research.
There you go. Okay. That's the one I mean. And that's, so she was the editor of that. She collaborated, obviously she published a lot. But I think mostly to me, she was an example of a very generous scholar who had a lot to offer, but also who was very concerned about, allowing younger, less experienced scholars, to kind of be part of the network.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, so, I think it's very good that we talk about Josine because, of course, it's too late to make an interview with her. But as we were mentioning, I would also like to remind her a little bit as the key figure that she was, because when I started studying criminology in Lausanne in 1994, Martin Kides at that time was the dean of the faculty, and so he was allowed not to teach one class. And so Josine was my professor of introduction to criminology. So that was my first contact with her. Then she remained a visiting professor in Lausanne for many years. At that time, they were not very keen about the age of retirement. And then she was in my PhD dissertation. She was one of the experts of my PhD dissertation. And then she offered me, I always remember Martin invited us all to the boat. He likes the boats in the river, in the lake, like in the first ESC conference. And she offered me a book, a noir, a novel, maybe by Patricia Highsmith. I don't remember exactly.
But Patricia Highsmith, yeah.
Yeah,
Stranger
and so
on the train.
yeah, exactly, Hitchcock. But it was not that one. But she knew I liked the. But okay, so yeah, she was really important. Then another very important thing I remember is that, of course, Martin met her because probably at the American Society of Criminology, because at that time people met there, and that was the argument in 1999. For the European Society of Criminology. And we were at the ASC, at the American Society in Toronto, and Martin organized a dinner with Michael Gottfredson, Josine, Marianne, her daughter. I think you were not there. And this is where Martin said, why don't we create this association? And she started from the beginning. Of course, when you ask about the origins, you get different stories too. But what I lived, what I saw, but I'm sure there are other narratives, was there. And so she played also a major role there in the creation of the European Society of Criminology. So at the same time, and this is a more general thing, I think it was a time when the professors of criminology were more interested in general culture. I don't know, they have, it's like the typical European professor as you imagine her or him in the 50s with a knowledge of many things and less interested in publishing in the most well-known scientific journals. This is a discussion I had with people from the NSCR once, because I said, why don't you publish more in the European journals? There are two, European Journal of Criminology and the one that you mentioned. But of course, they get more quotations, more citations if they publish in American journals, and they have a bigger impact factor. And this was completely different, because at that time, for example, now it's very difficult to get someone to review articles because I want to publish. But this generation, like Thornley is one example. Of course, Justine, as we mentioned, Martin.
Yeah.
Jan van Dijk, they had like more time, and they would meet and they create these bottom-up things. And this is very difficult. You know, we've been trying to continue with the ICDS, the International Crime Victim Survey, and it didn't work because you don't have anymore the local professor that will get local funds and engage in this research. It's like a different time completely.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm happy that we mentioned Josine because she was really important. I'm happy that she got to be the president of the ASC and she got the award of the ASC. That was positive. Just before in 2009. And the other thing that you mentioned, and I think it's important, and maybe you can get the PhD student working on that. You said that the ISUD serves as a line to see how criminology changed during the year.
Yeah.
And I think that just taking the questionnaire, because as you said, Josine was very keen on Hirsch's first theory, on social control.
Yes.
Even she was, I remember because I saw them discussing, she was a fan of the first version, of the first theory, and not very happy about the self-control version. It's like, these fans of the Rolling Stones that tell you, but I like the Rolling Stones in the 60s and 70s, not in the 2000s. I remember this discussion. She was more towards, a little bit less interested in the version of Hirschi and Gottfredson, because she believed really in social control theory.
This is now, of course, too late, but I think if she were to read, the most recent modern control theory by Gottfredson and Hirschi, in a way it has come full circle, because there it has become very explicit that in a way, like the social bonding and the self-control, really, that they all kind of fit together. And so it's too bad we cannot have discussions with her about it anymore, because she could get so excited and passionate about ideas.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And how did you deal with the last question about this? Then we can. I'm so interested in the changes in the questionnaire, because you had to measure time spent outside. Now you have cybercrime. How are you dealing with that?
Yes. Now that's a very good question, because in a way in the project we struggle. On the one hand, we want to keep it the same, standardized, and so it's comparable. On the other hand, the reality is we have to adjust to changed circumstances. So in the current one that we just finishing, we do have some questions, of course, on cyber-related victimization and offending. But what we have included questions also about, how much time kids spend on, social media and other kind of, things like that. And also questions kind of like whether they have friends, or who do they consider friends. So we are trying, in this questionnaire, we have tried to kind of come up with some additional ideas. But the big challenge is that there probably is a need for a really new idea, a kind of a new theory that we don't have. That's the problem.
Exactly, because you started, and I think it's nice that about the issue of theory-oriented and non-theory-oriented, and but the expert here is LIeven. You should say something, because you are the master of theories, LIeven. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm the master of theories, but I think
I said
that it's very difficult to. I mean, there is no theory of everything, and there is no magic either. I really think that theoretical innovation is a good thing, and that adapting to modern phenomena is very interesting. On the same level, I think that we should not try to reinvent new theories each time when a new phenomenon emerges, because more often than not, you find similar patterns. If you think about different kinds of juvenile delinquency, whether it's online or offline, you can use similar theories. You just have to adjust your measures. And I think methodologically speaking, this is a very strong, challenge. And one other strong challenge, I think, is, of course, nowadays, I remember because I was partaking in the third wave. It's so difficult to get schools involved. And so internet surveys and how can we validate them? There are many more, I think, methodological than theoretical challenges.
That's interesting you bring that up. So because it's so true, it's a school-based survey and the challenges related to that are huge. So what we have done in the ISRD4, we actually trying to do a methodological experiment where we have the school-based, but then we also try to have like an internet-based shorter questionnaire where we have an internet-based sample. And some of the preliminary results are interesting. Actually, Michael Gottfredson and Michaela have actually done it for the US, and they were quite successful to collect over 4,000 of the questionnaires, where we have some of the basic, we have some basic victimization offending questions, and we have basically some of the like morality question and a little bit of the, I think self-control is in there too, I'm sure, I think. Anyway, so so what we are trying to do, we are kind of trying to see, okay, maybe time has passed for school-based surveys. Maybe we can find comparable results using an internet-based sample or something. So I agree with you with the methodological challenges. The theoretical challenges, of course, we also just glancing at some of the results. We have some kind of measure, almost you could say, of routine activity theory, like how much time do kids spend on different things. And it does seem like there is some, just glancing even at the results of the US internet-based sample, it does seem like there is kind of an association there. Kids that spend more time, not surprisingly, on doing stuff are more likely to be victimized and offending in a cyber-related way. So I think the ISRD is maybe indeed a good example of how times have changed, as Marcelo says, because I think so many things we are changing in terms of maybe the issues, the challenges. We also get a wider set of participants, more people like from the Global South are participating. It's clear, that, we are much faster, in connecting. We don't have the old-fashioned meetings anymore in Switzerland, unfortunately, but now we have Zoom meetings on a monthly basis. So, I mean, there are lots of things that are changing. One thing that, and maybe this is just more the larger context of criminology, I guess our study does focus on victimization offending. It's important because kids are important. But on the other hand, I think maybe some of that focus, I'm not saying is outdated, but in a way there are so many new challenges that we as criminologists face that maybe we should maybe spend more time thinking about, things like the impact. Think about like global warming, which by itself is not of interest to criminologists, but when you look at the effects, what you get is huge masses of people who are like, climate refugees, perhaps, and how that is a kind of the impact that has, maybe with regard to human trafficking or, other kind of, human rights abuses. When you look at, you can call it green criminology or environmental criminology, but, in a way, more and more we should be concerned really about, the harmful things that happen. A colleague of mine, Nikos Passas, maybe you know him, Nikos, he would say, things that are lawful but awful. I like that expression. And then, anyway, I guess the stuff you're doing is important, of course, and you have to be able to focus on a particular project or you go crazy. But what I would like to see also is, in a way, maybe more of a kind of a broader focus, not just on stuff that's illegal, but also maybe stuff that is wrong or harmful. And here is, I just looked at a book that was just recently written by John Braithwaite. He was in Australia, I think. restorative justice and all, right? Which,
Yeah.
of course, in Belgium is very important. And he just wrote a huge book, 800 pages, called Macro Criminology and Freedom. And it's a huge book. But what he does is he kind of tries to, again, put the issue of crime into a broader perspective of freedom and justice. And of course, again, I'm enough of a kind of a number cruncher and a survey researcher to say, well, you need to have specific questions and you try to figure things out. But sometimes, you kind of wish there was like, a renewed focus on issues that we tend not to study, maybe because they are so difficult to study.
Yeah, I agree. But nowadays, people try to combine many kinds of data, and I can imagine that if you have data from different countries on juvenile delinquency, that you can merge them with data on climate issues, data on inequality at the global level, and try to see longitudinally, because you have repeated waves, how these things are intertwined. I mean, in this case, the same data serve a bigger purpose.
You're right. Yes. No, there
are many new ways of employing existing data, and I think that's the case with all data sets. We must, engage ourselves to reflect on other possibilities to really exploit what we have, because I think it's a pity. Let me give you an example from Belgium. We have also the victimization survey, and there's just this national report filled with descriptive statistics, and that's it. Nobody uses it anymore.
Yeah.
And I think we can do so much more, but people are not used to think in terms of comparing data, having much broader perspectives. So let's hope that this conversation is just one drop in this reflective process.
Yeah, that's actually, that's really a kind of a really strong point to kind of make the link between these big new issues and actually making use of stuff, research that you're already doing, by saying, hey, you can try to embed your project into these larger questions and other data sets. Yeah.
But for this, you need generalists. And what is being produced currently is specialists. If you look at the working groups of the European Society of Criminology, more than 30, or the divisions of the American Society, you get a lot of specialists which are doing green criminology or environmental criminology, but what I miss is someone who would put all this together. And this is like the old generation of criminologists. Yes. And maybe it's something that because we are now becoming slowly but surely the old generation, maybe after having concentrated on some issues, maybe it's time to look at this. I didn't know the book by John Braithwaite. I will check it, but perhaps also he was very focused on restorative justice. Maybe the time has come also for him to get a broader view, and maybe that is also the way. But there are a few people that want to do this.
Right.
I don't know. Okay, so I think we cover everything, and we talk a lot. Well, we have the interruption also in the middle. But is there something else that you would like to talk about? Something that we did not mention? Something that you have in your heart that you say, this I should have said?
No, I appreciate that. No, in a way, I would love to continue this conversation at some other point, because I really do think it's so interesting, so important, kind of the work that you are doing actually with your podcast to kind of keep the history alive. I think that's so important. Plus, what I think is so invigorating is actually to have a discussion with other colleagues who worry kind of about the same kind of things. And sometimes I think we don't do enough of that. We try to do that.
Thank you very much. I know, because you told me many times that you follow the podcast. So I will really we're really happy with that. And yeah, I mean, when we were discussing about the podcast with LIeven, and so we were thinking it's a pity that we don't have a register, for example, of Josine Junger-Tas or
Yes.
Herben. You have the interview for that LIeven made for the ESC project, but it was not about criminology in the Netherlands, and he played a major role. So, yeah, I'm sure this is not the last time that we discuss, because at least we put all this together. There's a lot of material to make a PhD also, or several, about different histories. But yeah, we will try. Our idea is also to make some extracts, because now we are putting only the audio vision, but we want to take some excerpts of specific things that were discussed. It's only that it takes time, and if you want to make it perfect, then you do not advance. So we're putting the audio files, and then we will have some extracts of the conversations, specific points that could be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much, Ineke. We took a lot of your time today.
Thank you.
It was really interesting.
Yes, I had fun.
You told us a lot of things that were really interesting. Thank you.
I may have some other things that maybe should not be on the podcast. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you for following LIeven and Marcelo's Criminology podcast. This podcast is edited by Eduardo Coco from the University of Lausanne. Our theme song is Seagull's Night, Noche de Gaviotas, composed by Gustavo Cantero, arranged by Tato Germano, and played by Tato and Gustavo with the voices of Sasha Conte and Alejandro Turco Guyot. Your host are LIeven Pauwels from Ghent University, Belgium, and Marcelo Haen from the University of Lausanne, Switzerland. Cheers, and see you soon.